Introducing Nose to Tail, a podcast where we explore the world of aviation lifecycle solutions, insights, and more. Presented by Jet Midwest.
Welcome back to the Nose to Tail podcast. I'm Patrick Kraus with Jet Midwest. I'm here with my friend Mark Robinson. How you doing, Mark?
Very good. Good morning, Patrick.
Now, Mark, we've been on a couple of adventures together over the years, and I certainly would love to start letting our podcasters know a little bit of your history.
I think I started my list with you with my first ride in Cub Scouts and a Piper, and the second was for a job interview in college, and then after that it was King Air rides into Meigs Field when I was a lawyer. I'm a lawyer by training, came into aviation by accident, and everything I know is because something went wrong, almost literally. As a lawyer, I worked with the firm to take land for the runway for the Greater Rockford Airport expansion one runway ago. And they've now become one of the heaviest cargo airports in the country. They continue to grow. It's a offshoot from O'Hare. It's cheaper, it's easier to access, and it's on a lot of east-west, north-south transportation lines. So that was interesting. It's been interesting to watch that growth. The sort of biggest step into aviation for me was I was at a real estate company. We had property in 16 states, and we bought an aircraft to get out to those states. It's hard to get to Scottsbluff, Nebraska on commercial carriers in a day or two. You got to get on the horse and the wagon on the last step out. We had a smaller aircraft. We ended up buying a Hawker and had it on Charlie Priester's certificate at Milwaukee Airport. Milwaukee's a big commercial airport north of Chicago. Charlie did a good job. There were three guys that owned the company. They're founders, drivers. They always want to get that last penny out. They thought that Charlie was charging them too much for maintenance, and he was making too much maybe. So there were arguments back and forth all the time. When we weren't using the aircraft, we realized we could put it on somebody else's certificate to have it fly. So that's what we started doing. And then we realized they were going to use our pilots. Plane wasn't necessarily available sometimes when we wanted it. So we got another plane, put that into service, then bought another Hawker. So we had three Hawkers. We bought a couple of Gulfstreams. Then we ventured off and found a 135 certificate for ourselves. The one came available in Michigan. We bought it. We had our own pilots then. Then we started doing our own maintenance. We got a certificate. And then we were really in. And we were still a real estate development company. But now we had all the problems of aviation with little of the knowledge.
Always a great thing. Just jump right in feet first. So for all of the listeners out there, a 135 certificate, maybe define what that is and why that's the direction that maybe you guys went.
The certificate allows you to be an air taxi service for small business aircraft. It's the corollary to the 121 certificate that allows the big aircraft to fly, the commercial aircraft to fly passengers around. And the FAA maintains safety standards for each of those kinds of aircraft. If you're just flying yourself, there's still standards, but there may be lesser standards. Once you start flying somebody else for money, you've got the FAA to contend with in a much bigger way.
Well, that's good. You know, the foray into how to lose money flying airplanes instead of make money at real estate, it's an interesting thing. And, you know, I certainly have experienced a lot of opportunities to fly on private aircraft. And they are absolutely correct as founders that it is all gone. All the money just disappears and it doesn't stop flowing out of your wallet when you have that. So them searching for a solution to that, that's a great idea. And again, from a founder, you don't really know how to do it, but you feel like you can do it.
One's not enough to bust a nut of the fixed cost pricing of the infrastructure. Then two wasn't enough. Was it going to be enough? Then you had the G2s on top of that. We had serial number 2 of G2s, and that's in the museum now. At the end of the game, that's where that one sits. So that's interesting. But that was fun.
So now you've got the 135 operation going. You've put a couple of aircraft on there. What did that turn into?
Somebody knocked at the door and suggested that we start looking at wider body jets. So we purchased a 757. We put that on a certificate with a 121 certificate with Ron Ryan in Wichita. Ron had a great business model that we talked about crisis management a little bit later. Ron sold his Ryan International 3 times. Each time he sold it for a bunch of money, he bought it back for a little bit of money. And we were his last sale. Again, his business model, he had a bunch of other people's aircraft. He charged them a base monthly fee, and then there was an additional per cycle, per hour, per flight charge. So he made money whether you flew or not, which is a great business model. And we put that 7.5 into service. He had some indigenous customers. A lot of his people that put the planes on their certificate also brought some customers. Some of them were more permanent, some were episodic. And that's the problem with having an aircraft like that and not having your own capture customer. Our customer happened to be some people like Funjet and Apple and ultimately TNT Tours out of Boston that would rent the plane for weeks at a time or a month at a time or a flight at a time, but they took the old aircraft. It's a different model than Apple today may take seats on a plane, but they're not taking the whole plane. They're not putting themselves at risk, I don't think, anymore. It was interesting to watch their model go from taking the whole plane to taking part of the plane. And they, in the 2000s, really, they got more into becoming involved with the resorts in the Caribbean. The Ryan certificate at one point was the largest carrier of people into the Caribbean. The bigger airlines didn't focus on that market. They were focused internationally. I know there's a point where everybody was trying to get to London and back. They're out of New York. Everybody's trying to be the cheapest flight to London. We did a lot of work there after 9/11. There were some other things that happened where people weren't flying internationally. It started to drive a lot of the hardware that was here into the Caribbean because people would go to the Caribbean, but they weren't going to go to Europe. They were afraid, or it was still not quite open. So that whole model sort of morphed, and the bigger airlines put a lot of hardware there. The people that had the aircraft like us had to look for other markets. And so we tried to find college athletic charters, professional charters, and you're doing 1 day a week then in a season. So you can't keep the aircraft and the pilots and the crew.
If you'd only had all of this realignment that had happened, there's a lot more flights across the country just to cover your big East has a lot longer to go than just the East Coast these days.
Yeah, I had a couple guys approach me a month ago and say, hey, with the Big Ten now being the Big 86, or how many teams are in the Big Ten, which I'm a Big Ten fan of, I said, why don't we approach them? Let's be the Big Ten airline. I said, well, you're all the way across the country. Somebody's doing it now. You got to beat what they're doing, and you got to have enough to keep that fixed covered. It is a great idea, but.
Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine. It's not the football and basketball seem to be pretty prime time. It's all those other sports, lacrosse, and a little more struggling maybe for funding to make sure all of those get done.
A scenario popped into my head that I sort of forgot about, that to fill that aircraft, because you had to, when your customer's season was gone, or they didn't want to do it with you anymore, you had to find somebody else. And you can't do that in a week or a month typically. You got to get the routes established. You got to go get permissions from other countries. That aircraft was supposed to go to South America a couple of times. It flew as a national carrier for African carriers. I did some stuff in Europe on one-offs, but we had set up a program. We were going to be called Russia Jet Direct. We were going to fly from Houston, initially straight to the Sakhalin Islands. Japan-Russia border, a lot of Wild West of petroleum, and a lot of stuff happening out there. We ultimately went through Anchorage. We did a whole bunch of flights until we had the Wild West. Some of our cargo coming back happened to be coffins from people that went to the Wild West that didn't survive. And so when you work sometimes in international trade, there are things you must do to maintain your relationships and your spots at an airport overseas that we weren't quite willing to do. So we stopped flying that flight. So we had a bunch of infrastructure. Now what's left of it is I have a couple of clocks on the desks in the Russia Jet Direct.
Was that the 767 fleet at the time?
That was a 7.5. That was a stop. But
Okay.
The 767 fleet you mentioned. So after the 7.5, we thought, we like this model. We like the Ryan model because we were making money with that. We thought we could make more money. So one of the owners was really interested in aviation. We looked at 767, so we bought some 300s, some 300ERs, looked at some other things. We had those into service. We decided to buy the Ryan certificate. Ron was getting to the point where he was looking to get out. We had a good relationship established there. And Ron, again, some of the customers he had built in over the course of time, U.S. Post Office, he had some stable customers that we could continue to fly. And he had established a relationship with Futura Airlines where they had a reciprocity agreement set up so that, if you're flying the seasonal stuff here and you build the infrastructure and your season goes away, what do you do with the aircraft then? We talked about that a little bit before, but the relationship with Futura allowed us to fly their high season with our hardware and our people. Our pilots could go over, the aircraft could go over, and then in our high season in the Caribbean, they bring all their people over here. So it was a unique relationship, and we ultimately used that model later on with aircraft we picked up when the market fell apart, and with Turkish Airlines with A330 that we had picked up.
So the Futura routes, what were their primary? What was that flying look like when they were in high season?
They were flying the European beach zones. So they were based in Mallorca. So they were a destination themselves. So we were pulling people into Mallorca. We were taking people across Europe too.
Nice. Now, did you ever get the opportunity to get on the flight and get yourself a free flight to some beach in Spain somewhere?
Interestingly enough, the times that I was on flights was because something went wrong.
No rest.
When we bought Ryan Airlines, we had some good people. They had a good ops center in Wichita. We were taking people back and forth to Rockford to have meetings. And one day the executive staff came in and said, we don't want to do this area. So we said, okay. And Jeff Crippen was one of those guys. He went off to Omni, and he still worked with them. David Ray was a chief pilot. He did this. He's still with Omni. He's an executive officer there. Good guys. A lot of depth in aviation that they were still friendly, and Jeff was doing stuff with us for a while, and David as well helped us out. But we brought the crew within a year. We built an ops center out in our headquarters in Rockford, Illinois, and brought them all there. Interestingly, the headquarters we bought was on the Hamilton Sunstrand campus. Harry Stonecipher and some others had built out. Harry, who went on to bowling, had built out a very nice building there, a future gen building at the time, with the floor that our offices were on. My office was about as big as this hangar. We shrunk those offices over the course of time because in real estate, you don't want your office to be the biggest. You want to lease it out to somebody else and get some money coming back in to get that fixed nut covered. But it was nice to be there. There's still a whole bunch of buildings in Rockford with now Rockwell. The evolution of Hamilton, Sunstrand, into Rockwell. There's a lot of spin-off businesses in that region that are aviation-based, that's a driver for the economy there. The Rockford Airport is a lot of King Aviation, some others, a lot of good stuff there happening in Rockford because of that Hamilton, Sunstrand base. Getting back to the 767s, we moved to Rockford. We started to fly a little bit, we're interested in the CRAFT program, the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet program. And for those not familiar, the U.S. military and the Berlin Airlift recognized that they didn't have enough lift to keep doing what they needed to do with those packages every day to get them in. And the evolution of that, they asked politely if the airlines would help them, and there was some help that came in. And then with Korea, I think it was in the early 50s, maybe 51, that the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet was formed with U.S. Transcom, U.S. Transportation Command, which is based out of St. Louis, now Scott Air Force Base. They have, I think about the time we left in 2014, we left at 12, there were teams. I think at the time there were 3 teams. The cargo carriers like UPS, FedEx, they'd have a team, and the passenger carriers would join that team. And everybody on the team, you were required to provide at least 1/3 of 30%. It wasn't a third, it was 30% of your fleet, that in the event that the military ever had to call up extra lift, those 30% of your aircraft had to be available to go into that program. The benefit for the military was that they'd never have to go to Congress and require an emergency and shut down the civil fleet in the States. And for the civil fleet, for us, it was great because we were flying troops, some cargo, mostly troops, to Iraq and Afghanistan and to Kuwait, a lot of stuff into the stand countries, and they had huge demand. They were a little rough on the seats, but they had huge demand, and it was fun to do. It was exciting. You felt like you contributed. And so we put our 767 fleet into service there, and it was great demand until it wasn't.
Yeah.
But when they pulled everybody out and there was no more demand, we couldn't turn to the Caribbean because all the big hardware was there. So we were fighting a little bit. So we had to find a series of one-offs and other places to put those aircraft. We had a lot of stories about that stuff.
Yeah.
We'll continue this discussion on the next episode of Nose to Tail, a podcast presented by Jet Midwest. Don't forget to please like and subscribe to our channel.